6th June 1944, 0430 hours. The English Channel churns grey and violent, beneath a sky still clinging to darkness. In a dozen landing craft assault vessels, men of the United States 2nd Ranger Battalion check their weapons for the dozenth time. They're cold, they're seasick, and they're heading towards something most of them won't survive. But mounted atop 4 modified DUKWs, amphibious lorries bristling with extended fire brigade ladders, sits something extraordinary. Twin British machine guns, drum magazines gleaming dully in the pre-dawn light, capable of spitting out nearly 20 rounds per second. The Vickers K gun, aircraft weapon, desert raiders' favourite, and about to become the only thing standing between American soldiers and annihilation at Pointe du Hoc. The Rangers haven't stolen these guns, not exactly, but within hours, under fire from 3 directions and cut off from reinforcement, they'll treat them like the crown jewels. Because when you're clinging to a 100-foot ladder whilst German machine gunners have you in their sights, firepower isn't negotiable. It's the difference between reaching the top and becoming another body in the surf. The problem facing Allied planners in early 1944 was brutally simple. Intelligence suggested that 6 155mm guns sat atop Pointe du Hoc, a promontory of limestone cliff jutting into the channel between Utah and Omaha beaches. Those guns commanded both landing zones, range 25,000 yards. That meant every ship, every landing craft, every soldier crossing those beaches would be exposed. The guns had to be silenced before H hour, or the invasion would drown in its own blood. Bombing wouldn't do it. The Luftwaffe had proved that hardened positions could withstand aerial assault. Naval gunfire was unreliable against fortified emplacements. Someone had to climb those cliffs, fight their way into the battery, and destroy the guns by hand. The mathematics were grim. Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder's 2nd Ranger Battalion, 225 men, would assault a position defended by perhaps 200 Wehrmacht soldiers who held the high ground, had prepared fields of fire, and knew the Rangers were coming. Rudder's men would be climbing sheer cliffs whilst being shot at from above. Historical precedent for such attacks wasn't encouraging. The Dardanelles, Zeebrugge, Dieppe. Cliff assaults tended to produce casualty rates measured in percentages, approaching triple digits. The solution emerged from an unlikely marriage of British improvisation and American determination. The Rangers would use grappling hooks fired by rockets to get ropes up the cliff. They'd use toggle ropes and climbing equipment borrowed from mountaineering. But the key innovation, the thing that might actually keep them alive long enough to reach the top, came from the London Fire Brigade. 4 DUKWs would carry extending ladders, the sort used to reach the upper floors of burning buildings. Each ladder could telescope to 100 feet, tall enough to reach the cliff top, and mounted at the top of each ladder would be a pair of Vickers K guns, capable of laying down suppressing fire whilst men climbed. The Vickers K gun was never supposed to be a ground weapon. Designed in the 1930s as an aircraft observer's gun, it was a development of the Vickers light machine gun, which itself was a licensed copy of a French design that predated the First World War. The British Royal Air Force needed something with a high rate of fire for the brief moments when a rear gunner could engage an attacking fighter. The K gun delivered. Gas-operated, firing from an open bolt, it used a tilting breech block that locked at the last possible moment. This meant lighter moving parts. Lighter moving parts meant speed. Between 950 and 1,200 rounds per minute, depending on ammunition and adjustment. That's faster than the German MG-34, roughly equivalent to the MG-42 that would terrorise Allied troops throughout Normandy. The gun fed from flat pan drum magazines mounted on top, 60 rounds in the early Mark I version, 100 rounds in the later Mark II, though gunners typically loaded only 96 or 97 to prevent spring fatigue and feeding failures. Weight 29.5 pounds loaded. Caliber .303 British, the same round used in the Lee Enfield rifle, and the Bren gun, which meant compatibility with existing ammunition stocks. In tests, it had actually beaten the Browning for reliability, but the wide drum magazines interfered with wing structures on modern fighters. When the belt-fed Browning became standard RAF armament, the K-gun became surplus. Hundreds of them sat in stores, pulled from obsolete aircraft like the Fairey Battle, waiting for someone to find a use for them. That someone was Lieutenant Colonel David Stirling, founder of the Special Air Service. In the North African desert, Stirling's raiders needed firepower, lots of it, for their hit-and-run attacks on Luftwaffe airfields. The K-gun was perfect, light enough to mount on jeeps in pairs or even quads, fast-firing enough to shred parked aircraft before the alarm could be raised, and available in quantity because the RAF didn't want them anymore. The SAS mounted K-guns on their vehicles and proceeded to wreak havoc behind Axis lines. Word spread. The Long-Range Desert Group adopted them. British commandos took them. By 1944, the K-gun had found its niche as a vehicle-mounted weapon for Special Operations Forces, which is how they ended up on fire brigade ladders heading for the Normandy coast. The assault on Pointe du Hoc began badly and got worse. Strong currents pushed the landing craft east of their target. By the time Rudder's force reached the base of the cliffs, they were 40 minutes late, and the Germans were thoroughly alerted. The 4 DUKWs with their ladder-mounted K-guns struggled through heavy surf. One swamped and sank. Another couldn't get its ladder extended properly. But 2 made it to the base of the cliffs and raised their ladders toward the sky. Sergeant William Stiverson extended his British Merryweather ladder 90 feet into the air and opened fire with his twin K-guns. The sound was like ripping canvas, magnified 100-fold. Tracers arced upward, hammering the cliff edge, forcing German defenders to pull back from the precipice. It wasn't precision fire. The K-gun's reputation for controllability was earned in short bursts, not sustained automatic fire. But that didn't matter. What mattered was volume. 20 rounds per second per gun. 40 rounds per second from a twin mount. 96-round drums ran dry in roughly 4.5 seconds of continuous fire. Reload. Fire again. Keep the Germans' heads down. Buy the climbers precious seconds. The Rangers who reached the top found the gun emplacements empty. The 155mm guns had been moved inland days earlier, replaced by wooden decoys. But the position still had to be held. German counterattacks came within hours. The Rangers, down to roughly 90 men, who could still fight after 2 days of combat, held a perimeter barely larger than a cricket pitch. They held it with rifles, grenades, and whatever they could scavenge. Those who'd made it up with the K-guns used them until ammunition ran dry, then abandoned them for more readily available weapons. Records of exactly how many K-guns reached the top of Pointe du Hoc, or how long they remained in action, are lost to the chaos of battle. What's documented is that the Rangers held their position until relieved, and that the suppressing fire from those ladder-mounted guns was credited with saving lives during the climb. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The Vickers K gun's closest German equivalent was the MG-34 in its high rate of fire configuration, though the MG-34 was a far more versatile weapon, equally effective as a sustained fire tripod-mounted gun or a light machine gun on a bipod. The Americans had nothing comparable in terms of rate of fire. The Browning automatic rifle fired at a sedate 500 to 600 rounds per minute, and the M1919 Browning roughly the same. The M2 Browning in .50 caliber could manage 450 to 600 rounds per minute. Devastating at range, but far too heavy for the sort of mobile operations where the K-gun excelled. What made the K-gun special wasn't raw firepower, the .50 Browning hit harder, but the combination of high rate of fire, relatively lightweight, and the fact that hundreds of them were available because aircraft warfare had moved on. The British commandos who used K-guns in Normandy found the same problem the SAS had encountered. The gun could burn through available ammunition faster than it could be resupplied. A commando heavy weapons section of 16 men equipped with K-guns could put out withering fire for roughly 90 seconds before running dry. Then they were carrying 29.5-pound paperweights. This limitation saw K-guns withdrawn from commando service later in 1944, replaced by weapons with more sustainable rates of fire. The impact of the Vickers K gun on D-Day is difficult to quantify precisely. No official after-action reports isolate its contribution from the general chaos of combat. What can be said is this: the Rangers who climbed those ladders under fire at Pointe du Hoc succeeded in an assault that should, by any reasonable military calculation, have failed. Suppressing fire from above the beach whilst men climbed was identified in subsequent debriefings as crucial. Whether K-guns or Brownings or any other weapon would have done the job equally well is speculation. What actually happened is that K-guns were there, they were fired, and the Rangers reached the top. The psychological effect of that rate of fire, the sheer noise and volume of tracers, almost certainly exceeded its material effect in terms of casualties inflicted. But in assault operations, keeping the enemy's head down for 5 seconds can be the difference between success and annihilation. The K-gun's legacy extended beyond Normandy. The principles it embodied, high rate of fire, vehicle mounting, drum feed reliability, influenced post-war machine gun development. The Israeli Uzi submachine gun borrowed conceptual elements. The Sterling submachine gun, which replaced the Sten in British service, incorporated lessons learnt from wartime experience with high cyclic rate weapons. The K-gun itself was withdrawn from service at war's end, though rumours persist that SAS units retained examples for special operations well into the Cold War. Today, surviving examples reside in museums. The Imperial War Museum in London holds several. The National Firearms Museum in the United States has examples. They're historical curiosities now, relics of a moment when aircraft warfare moved faster than procurement could keep up, leaving warehouses full of guns that found unexpected second lives in the hands of raiders and rangers. The thing about the Vickers K gun is that it was never supposed to be at Pointe du Hoc. It was never supposed to be on a fire brigade ladder, firing upwards at 90 degrees whilst American soldiers climbed past the tracers. It was supposed to be in the rear turret of an obsolete bomber, probably shot down over France in 1940, lost to the same chapter of history as the Fairey Battle and the Bolton Pool Defiant. Instead, it ended up being exactly what 225 men needed on the worst morning of their lives. Not stolen, borrowed, adapted, fired until the drums ran empty, and then abandoned in favour of whatever came to hand. But for those few minutes whilst ladders telescoped upward and ropes flew toward the cliff edge and men climbed through fire toward an objective that turned out not to exist, those British guns in American hands spat out 20 rounds per second of covering fire. And some of those men reached the top. 90 of them out of 225. Enough. Just barely enough. The Vickers K gun didn't win D-Day, but it helped ensure that one particularly desperate gamble, an assault up a sheer cliff against prepared positions, didn't end the way such assaults usually ended. With everyone dead on the beach and nothing to show for it, but another name added to history's long list of valiant failures. Instead, Pointe du Hoc became a name associated with success, however costly, and mounted on those ladders, borrowed from British stocks because no one else had quite the right tool for quite that impossible job. The Vickers K gun earned its place in that story. 20 rounds per second, 96 rounds per drum. Enough to keep heads down. Enough to buy time. Enough